Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. How do developments in India appear when seen through an international perspective? That's the key issue I shall explore today with one of Britain's foremost industrialists, the chairman of the Caparo Group, Swaraj Paul. Lord Paul, let's start with how you, a person of Indian origin, see India from an international perspective. And let's start with the Indo-US nuclear deal. Do you see this as a stroke of good fortune, or do you see it as an American trap?
Karan, first of all, India looks very impressive at the moment because it's really made a tremendous progress. And you know, I have been hoping that for last 25 years, and that's what I would have liked to see. And it's nice to see in my lifetime. And what is even more pride to me is that perhaps I did sow a seed which did not get killed. As far as the Indo-US treaty is concerned on the nuclear, I don't think people really have understood here what is it exactly India wants out of this and what is the US wants. Because, of course, these agreements are very long, and this, if the idea is nuclear power, then how much power is going to generate compared to what's the need of the country. Secondly, a new dimension which has not been considered, which personally to me almost worries me, that with the terrorism increasing all over the world, in spite of every counter-terroring measure being done by powers all over the world, is it really planting another bomb which is ready to be exploded and given the terrorists the hand to explode? Or is it been taken care of? And nobody has the answer yet.
So you seem to have serious reservations about the deal. You think both in terms of electricity generation it may not be necessary, and you think it's also a hostage to fortune for terrorists who could use it to strike.
I am concerned about the terrorism, and that is not only in India, that's even in Britain. That's where whichever country wants to put up a nuclear power.
What about the political controversy in India around the deal? How do people in the West view it? Do they see this as India being churlish, India being ungrateful?
I think people just can't understand the deal. That what is it? The Prime Minister says he has no restrictions. The opposition says you are signing away India to United States. I mean, isn't it really possible to clarify those issues without raising a lot of emotions, etc.? I mean, an agreement is an agreement. It's a written down agreement. Somebody should be able to very clearly clarify, are there really, I can't understand, first of all, that any agreement is there which gives you everything what you want. I have never known an agreement where one party gets everything you want and the other party doesn't. So that needs to be really established.
So you're saying that people are perplexed by the response in India, and they can't understand why India thinks that it should get everything it wants, because clearly an agreement has to be a compromise.
It has to be. I mean, there is no way you can have everything what you want in an agreement like this, which can be so different for one country and not for the other.
So if the deal falls through, if the government under pressure from the BJP or from its allies on the left walks away from the deal, how will Western investors, how will Western governments look at India?
I don't think anybody was bothered on that. I don't think having a nuclear deal, except for the people who are going to supply the nuclear plants, etc., would care a hang.
So the image of India as an investment destination won't be affected by this politics and by this controversy?
Oh, I don't think so.
In other words, the West sees this as a little local problem. It doesn't affect the West's wider relationship with India.
Oh, definitely not in my view. I don't think anybody is bothered whether this deal is goes through or not goes through. As long as India manages to keep reforming, as long as India can manage to reduce this thing, a lot of bureaucratic work, as long as India tries to remove corruption, that's far more healthier from a foreign investment point of view.
So from the point of view of a Western investor, someone thinking of setting up a plant in India or bringing his money to India, India's economic performance and within that economic reform is what counts. The deal is irrelevant.
Deal, in my view, is absolutely irrelevant when it comes to for investment. Is the reforms. If for investment, which is even more important a subject to me, is that unless we will raise the status of all sections of India, economic reforms alone will not attract investment.
Let's break that up into two separate subjects, and let's first start with what you said about economic reforms. Now, the UPA government is just over 3 years old. Do you think that Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was considered the architect of the reforms of the 90s, has lived up to his promise? Or do you think he's been far too cautious, far too timid?
I think he has done a tremendous job on that. I mean, one can't take away from that. He has done a marvelous job within the constraints what any democratic leader has.
Now, the reforms that Indian industrialists often say that haven't happened are reforms to do with disinvestment, reforms to do with FDI in retail, and in particular labor law reforms. If these reforms had happened, would they have made a big difference?
I think the question, in the end, a policy of any country when it comes to economic development has to take care of a lot other issues than just making a few people rich.
So when industrialists complain about the lack of reforms, you say that they're once again complaining needlessly.
I think it's a complaint is much bigger than which is necessary.
It's a bigger complaint than is necessary. In other words, they're making a mountain out of a molehill.
That's right.
The other aspect that you raised was the need to give India better education, better health, better welfare. How important is that compared to the reforms I've just mentioned?
Oh, to me, without that, in a democratic society, you are going to create a time bomb which is going to explode sooner than later. Because you cannot run a democracy with the size over 1 billion population where there is such amount of poverty in some society, and that's a very large number. There is such amount of lack of education. I mean, 30% of the children not having even the primary education. There is such a shortage of higher education. It's marvelous, 4 or 5 million graduates coming out every year, but as a percentage of the education, higher education is much smaller than a lot of developing countries are.
So then on this aspect, where we're talking about welfare measures to do with education, health, do you think the performance of the UPA government has been less than what you expected, less than what you hoped for?
I think the performance of any government in the last 25 years is much less than what they have been even themselves saying, because it has not, the delivery has been very poor.
Translate the bad performance of the government in terms of education, in terms of health, into what it could have been for the economy. How much economic growth have we lost because we haven't educated our people, because we haven't given them good health, because we haven't given them the infrastructure they need?
Karan, we may not have lost much till now, but already there is a shortage of skilled and qualified people in India is being felt. There are people going and saying there is a shortage of engineers, there is a shortage of qualified people.
So the problem will now start manifesting itself.
That's right.
And in other words, this is a time bomb which will explode both in terms of social unrest, because people won't want to live disadvantaged lives, and it's also a time bomb which will now begin to affect the growth of the economy and hold India back.
Without any question.
Do you see the political will to tackle these problems missing? Because politicians talk a lot about it. Congress came to power talking about the Aam Aadmi, but now in your estimation, the Aam Aadmi has been forgotten. So what is the problem? Is it political will?
It's not the will, it's the political delivery. You know, I can dream of a lot of things I want to do, but unless I have the ability to deliver it, it doesn't help. Unless I have the...
Is this the system you're talking about?
It's
bureaucracy?
It's not the system. It's no point in this thing blaming the bureaucracy. We are far too used to blaming bureaucracy. It's all the people. I mean, the industrialists have to take the responsibility for this. The bureaucrats have to take the responsibility, and the political leaders have to be. They have to start judging their performance on what we do for India in total, not just that we have a growth of 9.5% or 10%.
How does the West then account for the fact that on the one hand, India is a democracy, it's growing at 9%, but it has on the other hand, perhaps the largest number of children uneducated, a health system that virtually doesn't exist as far as the public sector is concerned, malnutrition that is perhaps worse than Africa. How does the West view this, and what do they say to themselves about India?
They just can't understand that, and everybody is concerned that these are the things which need to be attended to. Otherwise, the growth on its own, economic growth on its own, will lose its meaning and people will get frustrated. And we might have to do much harder work after that to maintain democracy.
So you're also saying something else, aren't you, Lord Paul? You're saying that India is so proud internally of its 9% economic growth, but outside India, the world looks at other factors, lack of education, lack of health, child malnutrition, and the world says growth is okay, but these other problems are really worrying.
No, there are two sections of India, two sections of the world. One who are interested for business investment in India. I'm sure a lot of them couldn't care less what you do with your people.
And the other?
But there is another one who have a very social conscience, not only for India but for the world, who have fought for life in this, and they are loving. And people like me who sit here, they see this big differentiation. And it's not something that you as an Indian can be proud of, 9.5%, 10% growth and poverty increasing.
So when you look at India, as a person of Indian origin, a person sympathetic to India, this saddens you?
It certainly hurts you. That's
Does it
why
embarrass you sometimes?
I think embarrassment is a wrong word. I think it makes you sad that why we have the ability to deal with these situations, why it's in our mind not coming, that there is a very large population in India who are also our co-citizens.
Lord Paul, let's take a break there. I want to come back in part 2 and talk to you about the new Prime Minister in Britain and how Britain views India, particularly as a result of the June experience when people of Indian origin were suspected to be involved in the terror attacks in England. That's in a moment's time in part 2. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate. In an interview with one of Britain's best-known industrialists, the chairman of the Kaparo Group, Lord Paul. Lord Paul, let's turn to the new Prime Minister in Britain, Gordon Brown, someone you know extremely well and you've known extremely well for a long number of years. Gordon Brown has only visited India once during his 9-year, 10-year period as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Where does India fit into his thinking?
Oh, he's very fond of India, and I think you will see in his time, though British relationship is almost at its height, that it will only improve both relationship politically as well as trade and investment. There is no second opinion on that. As far as traveling, there has been some criticism, and it's a criticism which came from the opposition because they were trying to sort of make him different. Gordon Brown does not like to travel. I mean, he is the kind of a man who says, I have a job to do. Let me get on with the job and let the others travel.
I'll tell you why I asked that question. Tony Blair, as far as India was concerned, is thought of as a Prime Minister who developed a very close rapport with both Mr. Vajpayee and now Dr. Manmohan Singh. Do you think Gordon Brown will be able to achieve the same rapport, or do you think the closeness in terms of trade will continue, but the personal relationship at the top between Prime Ministers will change?
Oh, Gordon will have a great relationship with any Prime Minister of India, because he wants a relationship with India, not with individuals.
And in other words, you're saying that he can forge links that affect economies, affect political relationships.
Right. So he is very strongly of the view that India has a big role to play in the international world, and he will always encourage.
When you say a big role, what sort of things?
Economically, politically, and he would hope that India does play that role.
And so, in other words, he will provide opportunities for India to fulfill its own political ambitions.
Yes, without any question.
Indians often say that India wants to sit on the high table. Gordon Brown, you're saying to me, also wants to see India at the high table.
Oh, I have absolutely no doubt on that. And let me also say, most of the European governments would like India to do that.
Tell me something. Gordon Brown is often thought of as a shy person, perhaps a slightly introverted person. Is that in fact the real Gordon Brown, or is that just a press misimpression?
No, he is a very shy person, but more than that, he's a very has a prime minister of great conviction, and he believes that getting on with the job is far more important than trying to be spinning all the time.
So spin and presentation are something that he doesn't think is important.
No.
It's not part of his style.
No.
Saying the truth and saying it honestly is more important than presenting the story nicely.
With Gordon Brown, you get what he is. You don't get anything different than what he says and what he is.
Now in June, at the time of the failed London bombing and the suicide attack at Glasgow Airport, the finger of suspicion pointed in England to a number of people of Indian origin, many of them, in fact, who had come from the city of Bangalore. Has this affected the way the British people look at India and look at Indian visitors?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's overplayed in India. The British people are far too mature for that. Don't forget, Britain has seen terrorism for 70 years, longer than any other country in the world. And you know that, Karan, more than anybody else, because you know Britain more than even I do. I don't think anybody get into that kind of thing. I have not heard it from the British sources that much. I rather feel that sometimes the people from India say that.
In India, the great boast has been that Indian Muslims are unaffected, they're untouched by Al-Qaeda. Do British people still believe that, or are they now saying to themselves, no, that may not be true?
I don't think anybody believes anywhere that some people cannot be touched by Al-Qaeda. I think it will be a little bit too sort of childish or innocent to believe that. It's all you can do is hope for it.
A view that's held in India of Britain this time around is that the British people after 2001, after the 2005 tube attacks, are becoming concerned about Muslims. Some of them are becoming racist about Muslims, others are distancing themselves from Muslims. Is that something you've noticed?
Not a great deal. I think you will always find a little minority who gets a little bit more sensitive to it. By and large, the British people, as I say, are mature enough, and having seen terrorism. See, the terrorism's only new change is the suicide bombers. Otherwise, terrorism, Britain has seen from Northern Ireland for a long, long time.
What about the British government? Is it concerned that British Muslims, and perhaps how British people view Muslims from outside Britain, has changed, and that maybe steps need to be taken to undemonize Muslims?
Oh yes, I think that effort has been made right from the day of that July 2005. And I don't think any government and any party wants to really believe that it is just Muslims. It is just some of the people who are unfortunately misguided, and they hope they can persuade them to be different.
And do you think that that is being accepted by people as well?
By and large, I think a majority of them. I mean, I can't say everybody accepts that, but a majority of the people do believe that. I don't think a large majority of British people think every Muslim is a terrorist.
Lord Paul, a pleasure speaking to you.
Nice
on
to
Devil's
see you
Advocate.
again, Karen.